Hey folks, welcome to the Unity Campfire. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Jo Jorgensen, candidate for president, running on the Libertarian Party ticket. She is a PhD in organizational psychology from Clemson, where she now teaches. Welcome, Jo.
So glad to be here. Thanks.
All right, so obviously running for president on the Libertarian ticket is an unusual thing to do. You want to tell us a little bit about your perspective on this race and your place in it?
Well, I'm hoping to bring over people who are fed up with the old system, and we're doing a good job since about 75% of our volunteers are from outside the party. And I've been telling voters that the reason I'm running for office is government is too big, too bossy, too nosy, too intrusive. But the worst part is they usually end up hurting the very people they're trying to help.
All right, so you said 75% of your volunteers. That means 75% of the people volunteering for your campaign are outside of your own party, the Libertarian Party. Interesting. Okay, and this is always a delicate question for people running for president. There's some sort of unwritten rule that one has to insist that they are definitely going to win no matter what the prospects are. Are you in that position that you have to insist that this is going to result in you attaining the White House, or can you be more candid than that with us?
Well, of course, my goal is to win. As an industrial psychologist, I know that even impossible goals are motivating. However, I haven't called the moving van yet to go to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
All right, that's a very diplomatic way of putting that. So let's get to brass tacks. We come to be on the Unity Campfire because Unity approached the Libertarian Party about the possibility of joining forces. We were met with resistance from the party and from you and your campaign in particular, resistance which I would say is unfortunate but quite understandable from our perspective. And then you graciously agreed to come on the Campfire and talk to us about the electoral predicament. And so what I want to find out is where we have common ground and where we don't. At this point, Unity 2020, the proposal to take the White House this year, has been suspended, as we promised to do if we were not in a position to win the White House. So in some sense, the question about teaming up has been postponed until a future election. So we are in a position to talk openly about where we are, how we got here, and what it means. What do you see with respect to the Unity movement, which, as you know, is not a party, the Libertarian Party, the Greens, and other efforts to escape the duopoly?
Well, I'm a bit confused by your strategy because you want to escape the duopoly, but my understanding is you wanted to run a Democrat and Republican. And here's the thing. I view Democrats and Republicans as having a very similar system, completely different than libertarians. And a good example to explain it would be education. The way the Democrats and Republicans do it is you got to battle it out for everything. So if you want school in your, or I'm sorry, if you want prayer in your school and your neighbor doesn't, you got to battle it out. You each got to support your own candidate. You got to donate money, get all your friends to vote, put out yard signs, whatever. And then on election day, one of you is going to win and one of you is going to lose. The libertarian way is you get to keep your resources and you get to vote with your dollars. You get to vote with your feet every day. So you can choose a school that doesn't have, or that does have prayer. Your neighbor can choose a school that doesn't, and you can get along. Like with these ridiculous mask laws with a one size fits all, where we've got the government, there's a winner take all. We all got to do a one size fits all that the government tells us. I think you should vote with your feet. So if you want to wear a mask, you can vote to wear a mask that day and go to Walmart or one of the many other stores who have chosen to have that as a policy regardless of the law. And then if you don't want to wear a mask, you can vote to not wear a mask that day and go to one of the other stores who might offer where you don't have to wear one. But both Democrats and Republicans want us to be one size fits all, whether it's healthcare, retirement, education, go right down the line. And I just think that decisions are too personal. And in fact, when people ask me why are we so polarized, I would suggest that part of it is because we are. they are trying to fit us into one size fits all. For instance, what if we all had to vote on whether or not to be vegetarians or eat steak? Can you imagine the outcome of that? And you might say, well, that's kind of ridiculous, but whether or not you vaccinate yourself, that's personal. What kind of school you go to, what kind of retirement, healthcare, why are we putting those up for a vote? So the libertarian way is you get to vote for how you want to do it on a daily basis.
Well, there are two things embedded in what you've just said, and I'd like to take them in order. The first one, you said you were confused by our strategy because it seemed like we wanted to elect a Democrat and a Republican. And I presume you're talking about the unity ticket, which was Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw, indeed a Republican and a Democrat. But I want to point out that the fact that they ended up on our ticket was the result of a process in which the people who were supportive of the movement came to the conclusion that those were the best people for us to draft. It was not our intention to set out to find a Democrat and a Republican. And I would point out that with respect to Tulsi, here you have a Democrat who was labeled by a previous candidate for the presidency as a Russian asset. So to the extent that Tulsi is indeed a Democrat, she is one who has bucked the party power structure and paid a heavy price for it. So to our way of thinking, it doesn't matter if you are a Democrat or are a Republican. What matters is that you are interested in good governance and that you are, well, the three characteristics we laid out as the plan was set in motion was that you were a capable patriot who would do the right thing in the office. So in this case, I don't think there is any mystery really about how we ended up with those two. They both met our criteria. With respect to the second question, I've read some of what you've written and I've listened to some of what you've said in various places about liberty. And this is someplace I think, and I want to speak very carefully, I do have an ideological perspective, but the unity movement does not, right? So I'm going to speak a little bit personally. I am compelled that liberty is a special virtue and that this is something that the libertarians indeed have right. Where I think we differ is that the view of liberty held by libertarians, and one I hear you advocating even on this broadcast, is I would call it a narrow view of liberty, where liberty is about removing rules and regulations and eliminating governance structures. I would argue that in many cases, governance structures where they are well applied actually serve to liberate people. So, for example, the regulations that make air travel safe liberate you to travel around the globe and not worry about a part failing and falling out of the sky. It's become very unlikely that that will happen. So where we part company is, I would argue we should be seeking policies that liberate people. And when the policies that liberate people involve increased regulation, then that's what we should do. And, you raised the issue of vaccines. I certainly have concerns about things like vaccine safety, but it seems to me that government should ensure that vaccines are so safe that we can get the public health benefit that comes from people being widely vaccinated. I would, of course, be uncomfortable with the requirement if the vaccines are not made safe and if there's a perverse incentive held by the companies that manufacture them. But in any case, there's a lot to talk about here. But what do you see now that you've heard that description about the places that we see eye to eye and where we might part company?
Well, I can go back to your well, first of all, Tulsi Gabbard, I completely agree with her on her anti-war stance. And I do believe that the Democratic Party muzzled her. They wouldn't let her on, they changed the requirements and wouldn't let her on stage. And I do think that the Democratic Party shut her down, and they shouldn't have done that. However, she is, yeah, the reason she was called a Russian spy or whatever by Hillary is that she was a Bernie supporter. So she thinks that government can do a better job than individuals, than businesses. And I don't agree with that at all. So Tulsi does not want us to be able to vote with our feet. She doesn't want to leave the decision making power up to us. And what I've been telling people is that you can spend your money better than any special interest or bureaucrat in Washington. And your candidates don't agree with that. So again, they're on the side of we're going to have a bunch of people tell us what to do and spend our money for us, as opposed to we get to vote with our feet and vote with our dollars. As far as you said, vaccines being safe. So I presume that's through the FDA, but it's thanks to the FDA that we were less safe during coronavirus. There were literally dozens of testing kits that we could have been using. And between the FDA and the CDC in the beginning, they only allowed 2 of them. And yet South Korea, who confirmed its first case within like the same week that we confirmed ours, they got ahead in testing and they were able to contain the spread without any lockdowns. Meanwhile, we have a lockdown thanks to the people who are supposed to make us safe, and we lose tens of millions of jobs. And I mean, don't get me started with the FDA. Thanks to the FDA, now it costs about $1 billion to bring a drug to market. It's sometimes a 10-year process, and it's the patients who are desperately waiting for a drug that just might save their lives, and it's the FDA that's preventing them from doing that.
Well, so I would agree with you that the FDA is far from ideal as a regulator. And I would argue that the primary reason that the FDA falls short is capture, and that regulatory capture is the great, largely undiscussed problem of our age, that it prevents good governance all over the place. But if we can...
Oh, so can I interrupt you? Have I just turned you into a libertarian?
Well, if you go to my Wikipedia page, which I, of course, had nothing to do with putting together, but it correctly quotes me as describing myself as a progressive libertarian, that is a small L libertarian. As I said up top, I believe liberty is a very special value and that we are justified in pursuing it uniquely. But the reason that I say that is because to the extent that you are truly liberated, it's because the other concerns have been addressed, right? To the extent that you are fearing being wiped out by a medical catastrophe, you are not liberated, right? You have to guard against it. And so I would argue that liberty is special because it's the integrative value, right? We have to solve problems of justice and fairness in order to really liberate people. And so as a progressive, I see it as a desirable way to integrate those problems. But here's the issue, and I know of no easy way to have this discussion, but I think that we have to have it. There are 2 proposals on the table, effectively, right? You have outlined one mechanism by which we can address the problem of the duopoly, and it involves the embrace of a particular ideology, right? The libertarian ideology, libertarianism with a capital L, is one challenge to the duopoly. There is, of course, a green challenge to the duopoly as well. And I think the unfortunate fact of the matter is no ideological challenge to the duopoly can work. What could work is if all of those of us who see governance as captured and recognize how large the hazard to us is, were to team up non-ideologically in order to win back the governance structure, to free it from corruption, then we could argue about which ideology belonged in the driver's seat and when. And it might well be that for some issues, libertarians are exactly right. For other issues, it might be the Greens. And for some other set of issues, it might be someone else entirely. So the question really, I think, for third parties, movements like the Unity movement, is why aren't we teaming up to deal with the, I hesitate to say the elephant in the room, because I don't mean to demonize one party. I think, frankly, they're both so dangerous that we have to confront them. Why aren't we all teaming up and rushing Goliath together so that we can get to a place where our differences in ideology actually matter?
Well, you're more than welcome to join my team, but I'm still confused as to why you would pick two people from the duopoly to try to beat the duopoly, because they're at the very heart of what's wrong with our system.
Oh, I don't agree. I would argue that there are three kinds of people in government, right? We have very corrupt people who are there effectively um, to seek their own betterment. We have courageous people who are always on the outs with the power structure, who are trying to fight it from within. And then we have a great many people caught in the middle, people who might strongly prefer an uncorrupt system, but are trying to play ball within it. And the fact is, we don't know what percentages each group contains. But when I saw that we had nominated Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw, I thought it was actually quite a good choice, not because they were Democrats and Republicans, but because they were opposite sides of an ideological divide. They have a proven capacity to interact with each other decently, and despite the fact that they have ideological differences, to recognize each other as patriots. And I know, having spoken with both of them, that they are deeply committed to the idea that we should be doing that which is in the interest of the American public. So to me, the fact that they were Democrats and Republicans didn't count for or against them. The fact that they were capable, courageous patriots was the key issue, and I think both of them met those criteria.
But I mean, there's about 4 responses, and I should be taking notes here with our extended discussion here. But you are still choosing somebody who believes in the system of having people in Washington make decisions. There will be corruption. Anytime you have somebody who is making decisions for somebody else who needs money to get there, there will be corruption. And you say they're on opposite sides ideologically. Dan and Tulsi, I say they're on the same side ideologically. They both want to spend our money. They both want to make decisions for us. And they're both basically going to have us live under a one-size-fits-all from Washington instead of us making our own decisions.
Well, I hear your dyed-in-the-wool libertarianism coming through. And what I can say is we strongly disagree about how it is that we should govern ourselves. I believe we should have the minimal necessary governance to accomplish the job, but that often the minimal necessary governance to protect us and to enable us to be free is, more than you would imagine. I think, I hear, again, what I would call a narrow view of liberty, where the removal of a regulation necessarily liberates you. And in many cases, the removal of a regulation may actually not liberate you. So if I can give you an example. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, nowhere, even though it's called the Libertarian Party, at no time have you really even heard me talk about how do we get to, how do we get liberty? I'm talking about what's the best thing for our healthcare, what's the best thing for our education, what's the best thing for our retirement, and it's certainly not letting a bunch of people, special interests and lobbyists in Washington, make those decisions for us.
Well, so. The important distinction was buried in your response there. Yes, the proper way to make those decisions is not lobbyists and corporations. The proper way to make that decision is representatives whose allegiance is to the American people, who have a discussion in which the purpose of that discussion is to discover what is in our best interest. And they should talk about what values we should prioritize. And essentially, they should do our bidding as the founders envisioned. And what you and I think, clearly agree on is that that's not the process that exists in Washington.
Yeah, no, but that's still, you say our values. my values differ from somebody else's. We've got different religions. We've got, I haven't eaten red meat in like 24 years now. I've got different values than other people. We've got different ideas of how to raise our children. We've got different ideas of what we should have for healthcare. We've got different values about, whether or not we're vaccinated. So why do we need why do we want? I mean, it doesn't even make sense to say, okay, we're going to elect people to represent our values because we've got over 300 million people in the country. We've all got different values. How about letting us live peacefully among each other where we get to live the values of our life, as long as, of course, murder's out the door, force and fraud, of course, would be against the law. But if I can peacefully drink bourbon in my home, why can't somebody else peacefully smoke marijuana in his or her home? And if I teach my kids a certain way, why can't somebody else teach their kids a different way? Why do we? How is it liberty? And again, I've never even used the word liberty on any podcast or radio show ever in the months I've been campaigning, because I've been talking about, how do we get our lives back on track? But how is it liberty to have, again, everybody in Washington vote on here's how you're going to live?
Well, let me give you a couple of examples. First of all, just as an inroad into understanding the problem of just simply removing all regulations and its negative effect on liberty. Suppose there's a phenomenon I used to encounter when I lived in Michigan. It's called an all-sports lake. Right? An all sports lake involves everybody choosing what they want to use the lake for. You can swim, you can canoe, you can use a jet ski, anything you want. You can play your music loud, you can play no music at all. And the problem is those lakes are all dominated by the people who play music and are on the speedy boats that make it dangerous to canoe and swim.
And so, those are government-owned lakes, right? Those are government-owned lakes, right?
I don't know what a government-owned lake is. I know what a public lake is.
Okay, you're basically, when we hear public education, we're talking government-run education. I'm sure the public lake is a government-run lake, and as government does, they run everything poorly. So instead of appealing to the niches, it's like a free-for-all. In fact, I was just seeing how one of the repercussions of COVID is I saw that there were bodybuilders and personal trainers taking over the school playgrounds to do their pull-ups and stuff. And the kids here are amongst the sweaty bodies, and the mothers were like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Now, you wouldn't see something like that in a McDonald's or at Disney World. You wouldn't see that in a private place where people join for a specific thing. You've got it with the government, one size fits all. Sure, come and down, do what you want.
Well, but I don't understand your point at all. Seems to me that if you eliminate governance from this question, then you might get some lakes in which people wealthy enough to buy the property decide to forbid jet skis, but that means that a person who doesn't have much money can't go canoeing there, only if they're allowed to by the people who own the lakeshore. And so from the perspective of somebody who would like to see everybody liberated to find a lake on which the particular activity that they're interested in can be practiced, you have to have regulation. It is the regulation that liberates you to have a lake in which you're, not being overrun by jet skis while you're swimming. So, we don't disagree that government functions badly, but I would argue government functions badly because it is corrupt. It's not interested in what we care about because it has
always going to be corrupt. If the way you get elected is by having money to run campaigns, and you get elected by special interests, it's always going to be corrupt. That's the problem.
Well, is it always going to have a measure of corruption? I would accept an argument that says, yes, there's always going to be some corruption, but is it going to be the lion's share? I would argue that the core driving force is now known to be corruption for our governmental structure, that what people desire is understood, this has been scientifically established, to have very little influence on policy whatsoever. That's a very mysterious thing in a governmental structure where people elect representatives. How is it that the public got shut out of governance? And the answer is massive corruption, much of it legal. I mean, almost all of it, in fact, is legal.
Exactly.
So we agree on that. We don't agree on whether removing regulations and seeking, we both agree that there should be a pull towards less governance, but that sometimes the necessary governance is substantial. That's what I would argue. I think you would argue that that's a very rare case, and I can see your point. I disagree with it. But again, isn't the overarching point that what you and I think about how much governance is desirable is irrelevant because other people have purchased access where we are supposed to have it in our electoral process?
No, because anything you want the government to get into will be corrupt. So it's good to have as little government as possible. And I would like to see the government reserved for police, courts, and military. The absolute protection, the absolute safety, not the supposed safety that the FDA gives us by, and even look at that. I mean, look at the FDA. You're talking about governance. Only those companies with enough money and resources can even get approval by the FDA. And then once they do, they weaponize their patents by holding a monopoly. So you've got government created monopoly. You've got government giving people power. In fact, there have been many laws written over the years. First of all, they're written by corporations. It's not the people in Congress who are writing the bills. It's people in companies. And there have been several laws over the years that have been written that apply to one company. It's like, okay, all manufacturing companies in Ohio with, this many people that do this. And you look in the whole country and it's like one company. And you realize they're passing laws over one company.
But Joe, you and I are two citizens having an argument that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because we don't have lobbyists. So isn't the necessary step in order for the argument that we are having to matter at all, isn't the necessary step that we team up, all of us who recognize the hazard of the duopoly and the hazard of corruption, that all of us team up and solve that problem, clear out the corruption, and then discuss how much governance is necessary?
Well, how are you going to clear out the corruption?
Well, the plan we announced was to start at the top, to rally around a ticket, to draft them, and to speed them past the corruption into a position with sufficient power that they could then work in the downward direction and address the lobbying and the other mechanisms by which influence is peddled.
Except then we still get people in Washington spending our money and making decisions for us. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard wanted bigger government than even Hillary Clinton did.
Well, I don't like blanket statements like bigger government. I want to know what is desired, what the unintended consequences might be, what the upside might be, who it's going to cost, how well the benefits are going to be distributed. I want to know all of these things rather than just saying governance is bad. But I mean, look, we know there is a line to be drawn. You're a libertarian, but you're not against the stop sign. You're not against us telling you you've got to drive on the right-hand side of the road if you're within these borders, right? So what that means is that you, Joe Jorgensen, capital L libertarian, believe there's a line to be drawn about where to restrict people's freedoms and where not to. And given that we both agree that there is a line about how much to liberate people from regulation and how much regulation to apply in order to make them safe.
No, I don't agree with you that restricting somebody's liberty means that you're taking away the right of them to murder somebody else. Of course you can't run through a stop sign because you might kill somebody. So I wouldn't say, no, I am not saying that. But again, you keep coming back to liberty, and I'm sitting here, I'm trying to look at what problems do we have today. We've got students with unimaginable college loans. And by the way, that's another example. I said part of the reason I'm running for office is because government usually hurts the very people they're trying to help. It was a struggle, but you could still get through school. hobbling along, maybe working a couple jobs, but then the federal government says, oh, let's try to help you out. They flood the market with money, and any economist knows, okay, prices are going to go up, and prices in with college tuition went up, how many times faster than the average rate of inflation. So again, I don't even know why I started bringing that up, but the point is is that I'm not here to talk about some abstract liberty. I'm here to talk about how do we get our economy back? How do we get college affordable again? How do we get healthcare that we have access to, as opposed to some abstract liberty and justice and all of that?
Well, look, you don't know me, and so I don't know that this will come through to you or not. I'm really not trying to be a jerk about this. But
I know. It's an academic discussion. I understand.
I don't want it to be.
Yeah.
Look, in my heart of hearts, I believe we will never get corruption to zero, but we can clear corruption out such that we can have an honest discussion about values and benefits, about ideology. And I believe that if we have that discussion, to the extent that your ideology is incorrect, it will lose out. And to the extent that it is correct, it will win out. It won't happen immediately. But I do think, as I conceded at the top, I believe libertarians have understood something better than anyone else. One thing. And that thing ought to be a guiding principle. As for how to get there, I am not persuaded yet that libertarians understand how to get there. It seems to me they have one solution and they apply it to everything indiscriminately. But again, it doesn't matter what I think, and it doesn't matter what you think, and it should, right? We speak for large numbers of people who hold value sets that look something like ours, and our system is supposed to put those things in a competition where we can discuss what would best realize our collective interest as a nation, and better policy should win out in the long term over worse policy. We're not supposed to be sidelined, but we are. And so that's the question, is can we get past that?
But see, I still disagree that we should agree on some kind of policy coming out of Washington. We should each be able to make our own decisions. So either we've got people in Washington running our lives, or we don't.
Well, that sounds to me again like an ideological discussion. And if I have one in exchange for what I think is a very major concession, which is that libertarians have understood the value that ought to be our guiding principle. I also think there's a concession that libertarians should be working towards, which is the fact that the principle, the idea that my right to swing my fist ends at your nose, which is what I was taught was sort of the guiding principle for libertarians, that principle basically is instantiated with a very limited imagination for harm. And when you understand that my having a porch light which shines into your bedroom window in a way that makes it difficult for you to control the photons that are bouncing around after the sun has gone down may actually be may be harming you every bit as much as if I did hit you in the nose. And if we start chasing down all of the harms that we accidentally create for each other by releasing toxic chemicals, by behaving in a way that spreads disease, all of the various ways that we harm each other, all of the things that are made worse by the density at which we are now living, we would come to understand that even libertarians who were imaginative about those harms would have to be in favor, if they were to be consistent, in favor of all kinds of regulation to prevent them, because they are the equivalent of swinging your fist and hitting someone.
No, because once again, the Democrats and Republicans say we should have a one-size-fits-all. We've got a law in our city that bans whatever. And libertarians are saying we should be able to make our own decisions, that we can live in a neighborhood. I mean, just like there are neighborhoods who you can't be under the age of 55. Or there are neighborhoods where you have to have at least 5 acres of land. So you can have neighborhoods where, you turn all your lights off at night. I mean, what I'm saying is, rather than a government having a one-size-fits-all system, how about we each get to make our own decisions, and we each get to have agreements with our neighbors on how to live instead of going to the ballot box where we vote, we put somebody in for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever, and then we all live under that rule. How about we get to vote by deciding how our neighborhood operates as opposed to the government telling us how we have to have our neighborhood operate?
Well, so let's do this carefully. Both of these are mechanisms for us deciding how to live, right? One of them involves every individual making the decisions themselves and nobody empowered to tell them anything about what they can and can't do, which I admit is at a what I would call a childish level, very appealing. Sounds right the first time you hear it. Of course, we should be able to decide what we want to do. Of course, does that mean that if you live in a place with rhinos and you want to hunt them, you should be able to hunt them, and people who want to preserve rhinos should just refrain from killing them? No, obviously not. If you want,
you brought up rhinos. I'm so glad, because my childish system would do a much better job of saving the species. I'm sure you've heard of tragedy of the commons, and so many people are looking over to Africa saying, "Oh, these species of tigers, and they're being extinct, and the government needs to step in." Actually, a lot of these are on government lands or common lands where nobody owns it. When's the last time you heard of a farmer here in America, coming in and telling his wife, "Man, I got a great haul tonight. I just went out back. I shot all 25 cows. We're going to live like kings." No, if it's private land, then you have a reason to carry it on. If you own cows in the back, here's why cows aren't going extinct, because there are farmers all over the country who it's in their best interest to have cows breed other cows and breed other cows and have generations, as opposed to going into somebody else's land or common land and getting what they can. And in fact, there have been instances of over in Africa where the reason people were poaching was because they needed the money, and now they've had places turn into where now they've got big game hunters coming over, and they act like guides, and then they manage the population better. So again, you put nobody in charge or the government in charge. There's no accountability. There's no reason to make sure that the species lives on like it would in somebody's private ownership.
Well, I as a biologist, I must tell you, I've traveled to a great many developing world countries, and I've seen what the greatest threat to these populations is. And you can call it government, but it isn't government. What it is corrupt government.
Exactly.
Right? Corrupt
exactly. Like, you can't get the corruption out of it. And this, I have a lot of people ask me, well, but what about the meat inspectors? Don't we need people to make sure that things are safe? But here's the thing. You can pay off meat inspectors. You can pay off people like that. And what happens? The government doesn't go bankrupt. It continues on. They might, promote the person or shuffle them somewhere else. But if it's a private company, if you've got something like, the Mobile Restaurant Guide or Yelp, if you keep going to places with 5 stars and the stuff sucks, then you're going to stop going there. So there's accountability, and we don't have any accountability in government. There's nothing that says, okay, if you're doing a lousy job, you're going to be out of a job.
Well, at some level, we're going to have to bring this conversation to a close. I think what I want people to get from it is that this is a discussion worth having. I'm confident enough in my position that I believe in a proper discussion. My position would win out, and the importance of it would carry the day. I'm certain that you believe the inverse is true. But what I know I'm right about here is that our opinions don't matter, and the only conceivable solution to that problem is to team up to get rid of the corruption so that we can, if libertarianism is the answer, so that it can carry the day, and if some sort of different ideology is actually more persuasive, that it gains the upper hand, and possibly some mixture.
Well, I welcome you to my team.
Well, I would like to welcome you to our larger team, which includes third parties, movements, and everybody else who's recognized how problematic the duopoly's corruption is, and how much that has to be the primary issue until it's solved. So at this point, what we are going to do is we are going to shift gears, and we are going to use this remarkable tool, Democracy AI, to allow us to interface with the audience and to have them pose questions. Elizabeth, are you present?
I am, yes, hello.
Hi there. Welcome back to Unity Campfire.
Thank you very much for having me. We've just asked for the first round of audience questions, and they're going to come in about 1 minute. So if you just want to sit tight for just another minute, they are flooding in.
Okay, we need to do something.
Two people who love to talk, we're supposed to sit tight.
We're supposed to, yes, quietly. Maybe if we visibly twiddled our thumbs.
You realize I talk for a living, right?
Right. So, all right.
By the way, I originally majored in biology.
Oh, you did?
My original major was biology with the idea of going to medical school. So.
Ah, you wanted to be a doctor.
Yes.
So
a real doctor, as my dad would say.
Oh, right, a real doctor. Yes, that is always the question. All right. So,
Bret,
yes.
Somebody has asked, I will say, someone wants to know why the different background, if you wanted to just.
Oh, yes, I should probably say, and I should have said up top, I'm sorry we're starting a little bit late, and the different background is about the fact that I am on the road. I was suddenly called onto the road, and so this is a makeshift background in a non-ideal circumstance, which is also the reason that we were late starting today, is that we are using different equipment, and it's strung together. Zach, the producer of the Unity Campfire, is at our home, so this is now involving 5 different locations. I guess it's just 4 different locations, but so yes, apologies for the slow start, and I'm not going to apologize for the background. I think it's just fine, but it's not ours.
I didn't even know. I didn't know it wasn't your normal background.
No, our normal background is cedar. We have a cedar background. All right, Elizabeth, do you have questions for us from Democracy AI?
Yes, and our most popular question is for Joe. Joe, how do you expect to realize the libertarian agenda given the current system? Doesn't it have to change in order for that to happen? Will it ever change? What is the best path to allow it to change? And that's the most popular question from our audience.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm hoping that enough people are getting fed up with the system that they do want it to change. And I got to admit, I was getting a little discouraged, that maybe Americans had lost their individualism. And then when I saw, when we were all told basically to stay under house arrest because the government was keeping us from getting the testing kits we needed, when I saw the people in Michigan, going to the state capitol, when I saw the hairdresser in Dallas, and when I saw the barber in New Jersey, and all these people saying, no, wait a minute, this is a free country. You don't have the right to put us under house arrest for months on end. There are a lot of people now who just are getting fed up. When I ran in 1996 as VP, I had to explain why big government was bad. I had to explain how having people make decisions for you wasn't a good thing. Now I don't have to. People look around and they say, yeah, government's gone way too far locking me up. I should be able to go outside. I should be able to go to work, and I shouldn't have to wear a mask if I don't want to.
Well, I want to ask you something about that, Joe. So again, this is coming from the perspective of a biologist. Mm-hmm. In some ways, COVID isn't nearly as bad as we expected in terms of the case fatality rate in particular. In some ways, it's far worse. The damage that is being done to people, even who've had mild cases, is very severe. And frankly, the evidence that once you've been sick, you get better and stay better is far thinner than one would hope. It is also the case that even if COVID turns out to have been less serious than we imagined, that it is completely conceivable that we would face a much more devastating pandemic that would require severe government action to control it. Would you be in favor of it?
And not for something like this, no. I mean, I don't think we've had anything that rises to that level.
The fact that we haven't had it doesn't mean we couldn't have it. And actually, one of the things that I would argue.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. Yeah, and I'm sorry. Let me fully more answer your question. I guess if it were as deadly as Ebola and easily transmissible as coronavirus, and then throw in something else, perhaps. However, still, when they started opening everything up in like end of April, beginning of May, the first time around, they asked people, do you think we're opening up too early? And something like 70% of the people said, yes, we are. So there's an underlying assumption that we're all going to run wild in the streets and not wear masks if the government doesn't tell us to. And all we have to do is look at Walmart and see that that's not the case, that people are demanding places where they have masks, and people are saying, yes, I'm concerned.
But what if you were facing a pandemic in which, unfortunately, we may never have enough warning. In other words, we may always be acting on too little information. But suppose you were facing a pandemic where the cost to humanity of it continuing to circulate, if it got out of control, would be astronomical, and the cost of preventing it from going out of control was something like 6 weeks of a far stronger lockdown than we saw, but then we would be free.
No, but again, who would be making these decisions? The same people in the FDA who kept us from getting tested. Once again, I'm going to leave the decision making up to individuals and different companies and healthcare providers. I'll let people seek help from their doctor instead of President Trump, who says, don't get tested if you have no symptoms, even though over half the people with the virus had symptoms at the time.
But the problem is, there are many quite conceivable scenarios in which a pathogen is not something that can be controlled, with some people making one decision and other people making another decision. So in effect, the libertarian position is like the all sports lake. It condemns us all to suffer from the indefinite circulation of all of these things, because inevitably some people will opt not to behave in a way that controls it.
Then you don't have to be around those people. Like I said, right now, if you wanted to, you could just shop at Walmart, shop at all these other stores. There's many clothing stores, many department stores who require you to wear a mask, and some grocery stores. So just shop at those stores. You don't have to go out to spring break with these teenagers if you don't want to.
Well, no, that's not true. I am in effect downstream from teenagers who decide to go on spring break and behave carelessly. I may get a virus that has passed through one of them that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So in effect, we are all on spring break with them, whether we like it or not.
Okay, downstream, that sounds like water.
Well, this is very much like water. This is a question of one person is careless with another person. They pick up a virus they wouldn't otherwise have had, and then several steps down the road, I get the virus from one of these people, right? I may not get it from them directly, but if I get it from, the receptionist at my doctor's office who behaved reasonably, but their kid was on spring break, then the point is, well, in effect, I was on spring break too, even if I decided not to go.
Well, even if you're wearing a mask and she's wearing a mask, sure, and you stay home, well, then I think that's just further proof for, maybe we don't need to have such strict mask requirements if it's not doing as good of a job as we think. And I actually did talk with a pharmacist who said he thinks that half of these masks are a placebo effect anyway.
Well, I think we now know a lot more about how the virus is transmitted, and what we know is that the masks are ineffective in an enclosed space where you have aerosolized viral particles building up over time. And so masks are highly effective when both parties wear them for brief interactions or in a large room with a large volume, but there are lots of circumstances that don't function like that.
Yeah, well, and I've only got a few minutes left here because I have another interview. But yeah, like my mom, who was 80 something years old, she pretty much didn't leave her house for quite a while. And when we would visit her, we would stay quite a distance from her, and she would have neighbors and friends deliver groceries for her. So again, you don't have to put yourself out there.
Got it. All right, Elizabeth, do we have a final question?
Yes, our second most popular question is again for Joe. Joe, what is your official position on woke theories, for example, critical race theory?
critical race theory? Okay.
Yes.
I'm a psychologist, not a sociologist. So would you care to explain critical race theory?
I'll let
Wow,
Bret take
that is
that
a
one.
can of worms, let me tell you. Yes, critical race theory is, well, it's going to be hard to describe this, but it's going to be hard to describe it in a way that is fair, but it is effectively the argument that all belief structures are profoundly influenced by the perspective of those who generate them, and therefore are all in need of correction. And so we have seen in recent months, we have seen claims that mathematics itself, even arithmetic, is biased by a racial lens.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I just hadn't heard it given that name. So what do I think of it? I mean, I mean, it's clearly out there. And in fact, I found this interesting that, and I think this is what you're talking about. It turns out that men or boys tend to be better at math than girls, but if you give them word problems, such that in which people in society help each other, then girls do just as well. So if they put some meaning behind it, and there, so I mean, I know it exists, but it is 9:05, and I didn't even get to ask my question, and my next one is a video call at 9:05.
Do you want to? Oh, you have got to go right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm literally supposed to be signing into the next show, but I could probably be 1 or 2 minutes late if you want me to ask my question.
Please.
Yeah, my question to young people is, right now you're having Social Security deducted from your paychecks each paycheck. Do you think it will be there when it's time for retirement?
All right, can we pose that one, Elizabeth? Are we going to be able to do it?
Yes, folks on Democracy AI should be answering that question right now. If you want to make sure that you're on the platform and you can answer your question, we will have answers in 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
2 minutes and 30 seconds.
From that long, I'm really curious. Yeah, I'm really curious. Well, we'll have to go back and watch. We'll have to go back and watch a recording of the show to see how the answers turned out, because I don't want to be so rude to my next host to be that late.
Well, we're sorry to have put you in that predicament. We will stay around on the Unity Campfire in order to get the answer to your question, and you can look at the video and find out what it was if you've got to go.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. It's nice to have kind of an academic discussion there. So have a great evening, and thanks for inviting me.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, Joe.
See ya.
All right, Elizabeth, let me know when we have answers to that question.
Okay, we just have another minute coming in.
Another minute.
Another minute and 40 seconds, actually.
Minute and 40 seconds. Yes, I hope we make it to the point when we might find out if we have Social Security. At the moment, I'm concerned about things shorter time scale than that. But
yeah, we don't even have security right now, do we?
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, all right. Well, surely the answers are now landing.
They are landing, and a lot of people are saying no. These are just some of the answers that we have rolling in. One can only hope. More worried now. Someone said yes because I'm already receiving it. And we can also share these answers with Joe's team so that she can sort of have this feedback on her own when she is available to review the answers, if that's easier.
Sure.
That makes more sense. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'd be curious what we've got.
Okay. Why
don't you give us a final status report on that question, and then we can see what else trickles in.
I will indeed. They are filing in. Sometimes 3 minutes seems like not enough time on Democracy AI, and other times it's
a lifetime on YouTube.
I guess it is. Oh, indeed. Let's see. A lot of people do not expect that it will be there upon their retirement. Definitely not at this rate. No, no, no. Absolutely not.
Sounds like a lot of no.
A lot of no. A lot of no. There was one person who was receiving it, so that's good for them. Congratulations.
Yeah. So the only thing I would add, Joe, when you see this, I would say, if you think back on much of our conversation, the disagreement is over what the implication is of the failure of governance. We both agree that corruption is the problem. Is the solution to unhook governance, or is it to banish the corruption from it so that it works better? And anyway, the overarching point, as I said a couple times, is how can we get to a place where our difference in ideology actually matters? At the moment, we're just shut out because the people with lobbyists have left us out of the discussion. All right. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for doing this. Are there s'mores, or have we run out of virtual marshmallows?
There are endless amounts of virtual marshmallows. Desmond is at S'mores waiting for everyone to file in, and you can hang out with your fellow patriots there right now. Campfire,
Great. All right. So stick around, folks, for Unity S'mores, and we will see you next time. All right. Thanks so much.